the time. So what I'll start with is pin holder itself started after the quill. Once the steel pin came into being, which was like, it's gained popularity around the 1850s or so. It was around before that. As a matter of fact, it was around in like ancient Greek times and everything. But the actual steel pin became popular around the 1850s. And during the 1850s, they were very, very simple pin holders. Let me do a screen share and get that going. Give me 1 second. Okay, I should have a second camera now going for screen share. They were very, very simple, and I'll give you an idea of just how simple they were. It was nothing to it. This is a very, very early pin holder. And comparing that with, say, let me grab something 1 second. Get the speedball out, and we'll use that for comparison in size. So there you go. That's how they started. They were all very, very small, very, very thin, and held a nib, and that was it. So from there, we went on to the oblique. So we got the oblique, and one of the first, we're just going to go over some history first. One of the first things there was a patent. This was the Mordan patent, which is a British patent. And this came along in 1831. So they did start patenting oblique pins, as you can see. And the whole point of an oblique pin is it's a crutch basically for right-hand people, because when a left-hand person writes, they're built at that slant of the letter already. When a right-hand person does, tines would drag. So they wanted to get an oblique in order to make it so that the right tine would not drag along the paper as you wrote like it did with a straight holder. So it was basically just an aid. And it started like I said, in Great Britain, came to the US in the in like 1850s, 1860s or so. And from there, it came in many, many versions. We have tons of examples here. So what I'm going to do is I'll just pull out some. We'll take a look at them, and yes, it does. It's very similar. The one I was just showing. Sorry, I'm looking at questions, and I know I'm not supposed to be. It's just basically a different type of ferrule. I'll go back to that. So you should be able to see, well, not very well. Let me grab a nib that's laying around. It just slides in there like so. So it's like that. Nothing fancy, just a different style is all it was. Okay. And one of the earliest oblique pin holders that was manufactured was the Spencerian, and I have one of them, and this is the only one I've ever seen like it. So this has a patent date of around 1860 or so. Get that out of the way. And it's very different because it just has a round tube that's inserted into another round tube. Let me get this focus right. Let me move this paper, maybe grab that. And the nib just slid around it. And the other thing with this very early one, this is, like I said, this is the only one I've ever seen. This is a Spencerian, is it would turn into a straight holder as well, because the angle can be set at anything you wanted. We'll use a pointer pin from here on out. Fixed point. So you had kind of a dual purpose type pen here. And again, it's very, very thin, still straight, slender, nothing fancy. And then the second version of the Spencerian pen holder, which is right here, is the first version with kind of a swell to it. So it was a little bit larger in size. I don't know exactly why, but yet again, they still made it so it swiveled, this flange, so you could set the angle for anything you wanted. And there's lots of examples of these floating around. You can find these quite easily. I've got several different iterations of it. They were all pretty similar though over the years. Very short, simple. So from there, looking at the next thing that came along was Zenarian. And the Zenarian, for those that don't know, the Zenarian College was a college in Columbus, Ohio. It was considered like the creme de la creme of writing, business writing and all of that. So some of the greats studied there, and they produced, which is the shape, which we now know of, the hourglass shape. So this is a Zenarian plain oblique holder. This would have been an early one from like 1880s, somewhere in there. This was actually Lupfer's personal pen. Lupfer was one of the teachers at the Zenarian College. And they were the first ones, like I said, to create this hourglass shape that we still use today. Makes it much more comfortable to fit in the hand. Your index finger lays along that, that hourglass shape and everything. And so the Zenarian College had several different models. Grab this tray. I'm working with a lot of pens sitting here, so bear with me. Okay, so the Zenarian College had the Excelsior oblique, which was their student pen holder. These were like 1/3 of the cost of these. And then they had the fancier version of the oblique pen holder, which was called the Fine Art Writer. And the Fine Art Writer was just basically a dressed up version of this. This is broken off. It was very common back then. We'll go to that later. But they used ivory, boxwood, redwood, and rosewood, Brazilian rosewood. And they had them also in a version which many of you know of now. Well, I can't even get it within the whole picture. Good Lord, I didn't even consider that. There we go. That's the 12-inch version, and that was the 8-inch version of it. And the length was absolutely all decoration. It was all for show. The length does nothing. And the reason it is so thin is because you need to have that balance and no extra weight out here. So they were made very, very thin for that reason. So when penmen were very competitive, as they still are today, as calligraphers are. And so when they would be writing with this big whole arm movement, this tail flopping around just looks really impressive. And that's all it was about. It was just a showpiece. So here we have, I have a lot of pen holders, guys. So that is a straight Fine Art Writer. So that's every version of the Fine Art Writer that the Zenarian College made. And one last thing is I do have an original box. So they sold these boxes. This was an add-on, an extra that you could get for them. So that is the Zenarian. And they had these plain ones in 8 and 12-inch versions. And to explain about what I was talking about with the tail was the penmen that were using them for their jobs didn't need that 12 inches. So it was very common for them to grab this 12-inch, grab it, and just break the tail off and toss the tail away. Yes. So there's lots of them. As a matter of fact, here, I'll pull out the rest of Lupfer's personal pens I have. I was lucky enough to get these and show you what they are all like, because every single one of them that I have 5 of them. Get this out of there. So these are all Lupfer pens that he used. And as you can see, compared to There's your hourglass. Every single one is a 12-inch broken off and the tail's thrown away. So they took these things now that we consider kind of really important things and didn't think anything about it and would just break the tail off and throw it out of the way. And then it was a useful writing tool. It wasn't sticking way out. So it's very common to see that. And then the other one during that period that came along was Magnuson. And Oscar Magnuson, he had it was in Quincy, Illinois. That's where his shop was in Quincy, Illinois, which is where the Gem City College was located too, just offhand. And they made fancy holders as well. They made planes, which one of Lupfer's. There, that Lupfer is a Magnuson. You can see they're very elongated bodies compared to the Zenarians. Where's my others? So okay, that's a Magnuson. Here's another Magnuson. These are both 8-inch versions. Really collectible. And to show you the difference between them and a Zenarian, many people ask that. If you look at this, you can see that the Zenarian body has moved forward more, and where it's elongated on the Magnuson, and it's a little bit larger on the Zenarian. So this is a plain Zenarian 12-inch. So Magnuson's, here we go. There's a 5-liner. I was looking for one. So there's a 5-liner, which is, it's called 5-liner because it has 5 white lines in it, and that's what they named it. And you can see this was another one that someone didn't like the link, so they broke it off. So they were very, very small. That's the other thing, is all of these were very, very thin, and they even got thinner than that, to give you an idea. I mean, to show you next to a speedball, that's very, very tiny, thin pin. And then Magnuson made these, which we'll get into Kelchner in a bit too, because I have Kelchner pin holders. Yeah, they didn't care about the brakes. They just grabbed them and snapped them off. So Magnuson made a line of pins for Kelchner. Kelchner was the cousin of, I'm gonna get it wrong. Was it Bloser? I think it was Bloser, which Bloser was one of the principals of the college. And Kelchner was his cousin, and he had a line of pins made for him based upon a, I've got the original model of this pin. Was it Zahner? Thank you, Gray. I couldn't remember if it was Bloser or Zahner that he was a cousin of. So, and I've got original Kelchners here. We'll get out in a little bit too. I think a lot of this is going to be show and tell, just so you can kind of see where, you know, pin holders came from and how they progressed. And they progressed really well through, you know, the latter part of the 1800s and the early part of the 1900s. And then there was a drop off because, of course, typewriters and, you know, penmanship went away. And that's, you know, we'll get into that too. And just, I'll pull out a couple more that's in this tray to give you an idea what we're working with here. I'm working with trays of pins like this. So I've like 10 of them laying here. So there's a bunch. And I'm not going to go through every single one. There's another Magnuson. There we go. That's a cool one. All right. So we have another pin maker. Also was Tamblyn, if you know Tamblin's home instructor in penmanship. These are Tamblin's. Got a few of them. That one, that one. Here's Tamblyn. Tamblyn was really ornate and kind of over the top. This one's in really sad shape, but it's a Tamblyn. You can see that you can actually take it apart. So that was really helpful for me to have pins like this so I could see how they were made. So that dowel is, go ahead. Did you have a question?
Yeah, what's the longest pin you've ever found? Shiwan asked.
12 inches is the longest pin I've ever found. I've made longer pins. I made a 3-foot pin, which is basically a 1 meter. And that one is actually on display. I gave it to Paper and Ink Art, so it hangs in their store above where their display of pen holders are. And then I made a 2-foot one. It's on my desk here. I'm not going to get it all in the picture, so we'll just pull it out through the picture. And that was just pure silliness. No point in it whatsoever. It's not a usable tool. It's awful. Okay. So Tamlin did all these really intricate, they did eyes, they did these square tails, and the Reed collection has a pen that has the square tail that was made for R.R. Reed, which is the owner of the collection. So that would have been a Tamlin made holder. In this tray, nothing that, oh, here is a Mob. AC Mob was a penman, and he had some pens, and someone took this pen and they ground a place to lay your finger into it. They weren't made this way. They were round originally. So someone just took it and ground it out, sanded it, carved it, whatever they did to get it out. And one more since we're in here. The Zenarian later, after the turn of the century, had this pen holder, which was plastic. So it was made for them, or they made it plastic. They made all of their pens actually in the upper floor of the Zenarian College, the top floor. It was a pen manufacturing place. So that's where they made all their pens. Oh, all right. So that gets us through most of this tray. I'm going to pull out a couple for shortly, but I'll need in a bit so I can set this tray off to the side. All right, so that's tray one. That's like the Zenarians and the Magnusons, which was very, very popular, highly publicized in magazines and through mail order. So there was a lot of them that got out there in various states of shape. Yes, Gray Zahner was. I've got a picture of him holding that 6-foot pen holder. I just need a bigger lathe. So, all right. So from there, I mean, this is a nerdy thing of mine, but this is kind of like my favorite here. This is minus a couple of them in here. These were all homemade attempts at pen holders. So I love collecting these old ones that just everyday guys used. They would carve them out of whatever wood they had lying around. There's no manufacturing process to it. It's just, you can tell they were handmade. So that's kind of where I'm at now, as far as I've got all the big name stuff. So I'm looking for oddball stuff when I collect now. And that's just a random sampling of just different ones that everyday people use. They just carved them out of a stick and threw a flange in them because the Zenarian College sold their flanges, so you could easily get flanges. All right, and here's another one. Kind of shows another version of pen holders. Crown made one like this. I have one somewhere over here, but it shows this movable flange, which in the early days of writing, that was very, very common. And if you saw on that patent, they had movable flanges as well. I don't know why. I mean, other than these would get loose over time, I could see that's why they get away from them. And after they're loose, they're kind of worthless. So I found most of my examples great. Actually, some from eBay, some from private collectors, but most of them honestly come to me. People, when they find a pen holder, they kind of research, and now I'm kind of like the authority. I mean, it's kind of sounds like I'm bragging on myself, but the authority on old pen holders. I know all the names by looks, I can tell, and so I get lots of people that ask, and then of course if it's something I don't have, I say, hey, are you interested in selling it? And the other thing I used to do, I don't do it any longer just because I've tried to calm down my purchasing, especially with nibs. I don't purchase anymore. I used to purchase all kinds of nibs. Um, I went to estate sales and the people that run them. And what I did was I actually told them, hey, if you run across pin stuff, save yourself the time. Just call me. I'll tell you what it's worth, you know, an honest evaluation, and then I'll pay you less than that, you know, because I'd like to get a little bit of a deal, and then you get the money out of it for the most part. And that's where a lot of mine came from, is estate sales. I had a few people that would just call me whenever anything come up, you know. There was times when I got, I had someone call me and had 8 boxes of Gillette 604 EFs, and I bought those all at once. And so I got out of the nib game though, because it was getting really out of control. So I no longer have them. I sold them all pretty much. Okay, so we went with thin, we went with old.
Chris,
Go
there's
ahead.
a question about why don't we make movable flange pen holders nowadays?
I don't have an answer for that. I've wondered that myself. You know, there was in the 80s, I have one here somewhere. Let me find it. There was a manufacturer that made them, and I've got an old Paper and Ink Arts catalog that shows it. Now I've lost, I don't know where it's at, but I have one here that's got a movable flange like that, and I don't know why they quit doing it. The only thing I could think of is, just like I said a while ago, how when that flange moves, it wears out. So eventually they'll become so loose they just flop around, and there's really not a good way to tighten them, because they're usually like riveted or something, you know, press fit. So I would say that that would be the main reason.
Can I share? I made this, and it has a movable flange.
Oh,
So,
really?
yeah,
I've done that.
This is one of mine. I made it. But the problem with it is that the rivets, it kind of weighs down the front end of the pen. So that's
Okay.
one, I haven't found a good way to make it lighter. So, but it moves, you know, so
Yeah.
it's quite useful.
I've made them. I made a couple of them for people where you had a screw actually to tighten it. And that was primarily usually a left-hander. A left-hander that wrote really, really weird or something. I would say, hey, let's just make a movable flange. You can mess with it, play with it. If you ever find a way that just absolutely works for you, let me know, and we'll fix it and make a fixed flange. I mean, so the flange should not be placed at 55 degrees. We'll get into one of the things I'm going to do, and I got to I don't have a clock up. I got to watch my time too. We'll get into in depth. I'll go through flanges, how to adjust them, why they're angled the way they are, how to angle them properly to help you write better, and all that. So that's one of the plans. So we'll get through kind of these old holders, which I'm almost through them, honestly, because I don't want to spend too much time just going, hey, here's an old holder, here's an old holder, whatever. But I want you to get a sense of where pins came from leading up to where, you know, kind of like that time when I started making pins and what it was like. It was completely different. So the next thing we'll do is we'll just go, there was really quickly touch on later in like 30s, 40s, 50s, there was all kinds of manufacturers making all these different, very simple, rudimentary, like this Esther book. Zahner got into these octo obliques, which were very, very simple, cheap pins. So there's a lot of those came in the 40s and 50s when penmanship was on the downfall, and they weren't spending so much money on fancy ones. It was just getting something to write with, and usually a student or something like that. Okay, then the next thing we'll get into is the ergonomics. So there was several people made ergonomic pen holders. Pull a few of them out. Still going to keep this in screen so you guys get a sense of scale. And all of them argued about theirs was the best, of course, and it only made sense to write with their pens, and et cetera, et cetera. And they had all kinds of ads for them. I'll quickly, what are those at? I printed out a couple of old ads. Like for example, this one, the Geimer, which I have here. That's the Geimer oblique. The picture in the ad is a little bit off from that, but the actual is scientifically designed. Yeah. So they all said that they were the right one. The most, let's see, what's this one? The most perfect pen holder made, which is the Skeels, which I have one of those as well. They're all different, made to fit in the hand. The natural grip, there's an ad for the natural grip. And here is a natural grip pen holder. This one came in a straight holder, which I have not found yet. Haven't given up though. The Ransomarian is lots of people talk about all the time. It's a triangular pen holder, and this one does not have the screw any longer. So I've put a little wooden dowel in there to hold it. What this had was, as you can see it in this ad, a little screw here you would unscrew and put the screw back in, and it became the holder for a nib for a straight. So this was the 2-in-1 holder, which that's what led me on the search for trying to find something that was 2-in-1, and led me to my deuce that I have produced now. So that's a Ransomarian. And then that's pretty much it. The other one that started with that 2-in-1 thing was Tamblin. Back in the day, did a 2-in-1 as well. Kind of the same concept. The flange came out and there was a screw in the end, and you screwed it back in and it held the flange. So, or the nib, sorry. All right. So there's all kinds of ergonomics, and everyone said their reason was, but the reality is it forced you to have a certain grip. So for example, and I'll show you with this one because it does it the best. It forces that grip more than anything. This is the Skeels. And when you have a Skeels and you put a nib in it, of course I didn't get any nibs out, should have. Okay, imagine that's pointed pen, but whatever. So if you went to write with it and you wrote on the side of your hand, you could not, because as you can see, it's pointing straight down at the paper. To be on the paper, it should be like that. And in order to do that, you have to turn your hand. So it forces your hand over into what they considered the proper writing position, which was, you know, these two fingers, nails touch the table, and supported like this. How does upward and downward? No, can't. We'll get into the upward and downward cants. That's going to be the next thing I do. We'll get into a couple more of these pins, and then we'll get into actually setting up an oblique. Because a straight's simple. I mean, you just put the flange, the nib in it and write. So all of these had their reasons for wanting someone to train them to do proper grip. That's what all these ergonomics were about. And everyone thought that theirs was the best. Okay. And this, I'll show you just quickly. Strom started like this, ended like this. They doubled in size later after they started producing pins for a while. Don't know why, no answer there. Okay. And then one more in pen holders that's kind of cool. I'll show a couple of these too. These are kind of cool. These are the original, it's just cool because it's cool. Joe Vitolo gave me these. These are the original prototypes for carrots. These were the first carrots ever produced. He helped design for people with arthritis. So those are the very first two, which is just a cool factor. And then this is the pin that Joe learned. It doesn't have a flange in it now. This is the pin made by Bill Lilly that Joe learned his grocers or script with. And he gifted me this pin for my collection because I have a problem. All right. In the 50s, this is one other thing we'll talk about that's planned, and we'll get into it later, was the Bullock. So Bullock came along, Blackwell did too, similar thing. It was an easy way to change your nibs without changing your flange all the time. If you've ever written with one of these old pens, these flanges don't bend. End of story. They are so stiff. The alloy of nickel silver, they will not bend. So when I have to move one for some reason or another, takes tools to do it. It cannot be bent by hand or that stiff. It would break the pin. So Bullock decided, hey, we need a way to change nibs easier. So he created the Bullock flange, which is this version, which has two different crow quill holes, and then also the regular nib hole. Back when they used to have these larger crow quills, they don't manufacture them anymore to my knowledge, so that's not very common. So when there's a Bullock now, it's the like paper and ink arts or that style, where it's just one of the things underneath. So Bullock did that to make it easier on people because couldn't adjust them. The one thing different that Bullock does compared to paper and ink arts at me is the screw goes in from the underside and sticks out the top, which I don't like because your hand goes up against that bolt sticking out. All right. And then last, we will get into, I'll show you the Kelchners, and I'll show them in better detail. So Kelchner, which again was the cousin, this is called the F.L. Tower collection. In the Business Educator, which was the Cenarian College's magazine, they printed this. This was the collection of F.L. Tower. F.L. Tower was a pinman, but he was also a wholesaler or a retailer of pin holders. So he sold for many, many manufacturers, and he was located in New Jersey. So he had this set up, these all hung on the wall, just like this. They're all numbered and grouped, and there's a key code for all of these. And I have the only known examples out of this collection anymore. Was actually sold to me by a collector. So this is pin number, as you can see, B right there. That's the actual pin. And what you don't know about these Kelchners is they're painted on. So these lines aren't wood like I do. These are painted on. So that's one of them. The next one, this is the famous one that everybody loves, is the G pin, which the G pin, you can see it right there next to this. And again, look, these are painted on. So they're just paint on wood. And the description is that he carved these himself, Kelchner did, these two pin holders with, the description said like pieces of glass to scrape the wood and shape it and everything. The last one is, this one is the original prototype for the Kelchner line of obliques, which is pin holder A right there. And these were woods gifted to Kelchner from a student in the Philippines. So all of these woods came from the Philippines. This is palm wood, and it's really, really hard to turn, but this was the original. So that's the Kelchners. And like I said, they're the only known pins out of this collection, to my knowledge. All right, so we've seen all of that, and y'all have seen my pins now. So what happened with me making pins, and I'll try and make this short, was my great-great-grandfather was a pinman, and he taught penmanship, and I found this out in like 2012. Yeah, 2012. And I found all his supplies, and I wanted to learn. So I went to learn, and they said, buy an oblique pin holder. I'm like, what the heck is that? And went to look and had like 3 or 4 choices at the time. That was it. Found them on paper ink cards. I think is where I found them. Maybe it was John Neal, but I don't know. And so I said, well, I got a lathe. I'll try and make some. And so I started making pretty ones. And people at guild meetings, calligraphy guild here local in Indianapolis, wanted to buy them. Lady bought them, said, you don't understand. Nobody makes anything nice, et cetera, at the time. And so I started making them, and all word of mouth. And it also had to do with those no choice in sizes either, other than you just had carat or you had like the century, hourglass was all you had. So I started combining woods and reverse engineering all the old pins I had to try and figure out how to do this. So that's where it all came from. And then the next thing that I've been working on, it's been actually for years, is the 3D printed. And I'll pull those out so you can see and actually compare them to the actual originals. So for example, this is a 3D printed, Ransomarian. And as you can see, what I actually did, this one's a little bit bent, but I sent these pins to a 3D company with scanning technology, and they actually took 3D scans of all of these pins. So these are printed absolute exact replicas, other than I had them straighten this one tail. So that is the Ransomarian. And it's really cool to watch these work, because what happens is the printer I have, it's got a plate that goes down into a fluid, and the fluid is hardened by UV light. So there's just one layer hardened, and then it pulls it out and it goes back down. And it's like Terminator or something. It's crazy. It's taking resin and creating a physical object out of this thing and pulls them up. So it takes 17 hours and 58 minutes to print a group of pins, most of them. So it's not a fast process by any means. Oh, and then the other thing I did do was I shortened the Geimer, because no one really wants a 11-inch pin. So I shortened the length of the Geimer, told them to chop it off at, I forget, I think it's like 7 or 6.5 or something. So this is an exact replica of a Geimer. And it's actually this pin. So yeah, these are all the pins that I actually sent them. Then the natural grip, did the same thing, of course. And because in order for me to make these, I had to hand carve them, and then I'd have the original in front of me and I'd carve it, and it'd take time, and it was really expensive, and I hated the fact of how expensive it actually was. All right, so between those, those out of the way, we got the steels, and then one more, and then we'll get into fun stuff with nibs and stuff. So there's the skills. Except I had them take the ball off just to minimize the amount of printing. No reason to make it more difficult. And then the last one is a Strom, and I think it was this one. That's the Strom. So they're absolutely exact. So you can get these on my website. I keep them all the time now. This is really cool technology, because you can make exact replicas without even thought. In all honesty, this prints while I sleep. So I'm making pins while I sleep now with the 3D printing. And I see that as becoming a really, really valuable tool in the future. It took me 3 years to get this to happen, for the technology to be able to catch up and be able to do it well and easily and without failing every time at it. So I think that's going to be a cool thing in the future. There's all kinds. Your imagination is the limit at that point, and it also makes it possible to manufacture. So, how do I take care of them all? The ergos, okay. Ergos, do they work for all hand sizes? No. And that's the other thing, was because when I was hand carving them, I charged 140, 150 bucks, because it took me a lot of time. I'm not a carver, I'm a turner. So I can turn pins rather quickly, but carving takes me time, and I'd have to charge so much for it. And then I would always try to talk people out of it, honestly. Someone would say, hey, I'd like to get an ergonomic. And I'm like, are you sure? Because I'm going to make you $150 pin, and you're never going to hold it. Never going to know if you like it. I just didn't think it was smart, and some people just said, I'll take the chance, it's fine, but I always try to talk them out of it. So that was the other point of 3D printing, was to try and get them to affordable price point, so that you could say, hey, it may not fit me, but at least I only spent $50 instead of $150. That's a lot easier to swallow. And then replicas have very, very close to the same weight as the originals. It's within like 1.5 grams, I think, is the largest variance. Because actually those pins, I print them at so the interior is actually not solid. Inside of the interior of the tail is actually a honeycomb. It's a grid in there, so it's not all solid plastic to reduce the weight to make them similar to the originals. As far as how to take care of pins, old pins, my pins, whatever it may be, it's really, really simple. Wax. Put a little bit of wax on them, even if it's a gloss finish or a natural finish. Wax doesn't hurt the wood. It just adds a little bit of hydration to it. And that's all you gotta do is wipe them with wax. Keep the ends of them out of water if they're wood, because water ruins wood. So that's really all there is to taking care of pins, you know. And if, like mine have gloss finish, if you just wipe them off when you get ink on them, they don't stain. But I think a stained holder is cool, you know. Someone's, you know, got a old stained holder that's got, this is really awful lighting on it. There we go, whatever. You can't tell, but this is really beat up and discolored. I just think it's cool. All right, so now what sort of wax? There's S.C. Johnson makes a wax that I use for everything. S.C. Johnson paste wax is what I use. It's kind of it doesn't smell pretty or anything, but it's a good wax, so it works, and that's what I use for all kinds of stuff.
I think we have a question about holding. Let me look for it. What is the grip diameter of a Kelchner Mark A?
Oh, what is the grip diameter? The Kelchner G pin, which is probably the one you're referring to, that's the one everyone always talks about. That is 1/2 inch at its widest point and 5/16 at its thinnest point, where the tip of your fingers are.
Okay.
And I know all these sizes off my head.
Are there any right-handed oblique that left-handed old penmen used?
Left-handed old penmen. There are very, matter of fact, I can't think of one example of a left-handed oblique from antique. Because 95, if not more, % of left-handers just use a straight holder. Their body is built to where their arm, you know, you've got your, here, hold on, I got some slant paper out here. Here. Okay, so there's your slant, your guidelines. This is at 52, so 52, 55, whatever. And as a left-handed person, when you hold a pen, hey, look, your nib's aligned with that slant most of the time. The only time it's different is if you have a severe hook or something, and there are some there are some people, I'm trying to grab just a normal pen, left-handers that will actually use a right-hand oblique like that when they hook. So a right-handed oblique will also work for a left-hander. Bummer is though, they drag their hand through the ink, so they got to float. But it's only the right-hand person that when you have paper in front of you, that's why you always turn it to begin with. And all of the scripts that we do, like copper plate, Spencerian, all of those were all originally done with a straight holder. I mean, they were developed that way with a quill or whatever. And instead of being at the corner, you know, the standard now is this corner points to your belly. All they did was turn the paper a little bit more, and then there you go. You're at that slant. And I still, when I write Spencerian, I write with a straight holder. I don't use an oblique. So it's not absolutely necessary. It's a helpful tool for a right-hander. That's all it is. There is no absolute you don't have to use an oblique. You can use a straight holder for everything. So yeah. Okay.
We're going to say something about the cant.
The cant, that's where we're going to go now. We're going to go into all the adjustments of pen holders. Okay. Bear with me a second while I get situated and get all my papers out I need and everything. So one of the things, the first thing is the angle of an oblique pen holder. Let me grab, sorry about this. I've got stuff scattered everywhere. I'm gonna get out my pen, the nib, so we can show. Okay. So one of the first things about it is aligning your nib with center. So you may have seen it. I make this teaching tool now that I actually just made for myself, and that's all it was. So this is a pin holder end, oblique pin holder. Yes, the flange adjustment is the same for copper plate and Spencerian. Okay, it has all to do with your writing. We're going to get into all of this now. All right, so this brass rod sticking out is the imaginary center axis of this pin holder. So imagine a line running vertically through this. So what that line does is the whole point of installing a nib is you want, and this one I don't have attached so I can move it. So you want that to line up perfectly with that center axis. So the very tip of your nib. So that's what you're going for. And that is done by sliding the nib in and out of the flange primarily. Okay, so you scoot it down, it's off, pull it back out, it's aligned. Now, you can be a little bit left to center. As a matter of fact, some of the older pins were made to where the nib would be just a hair bit left of center. Don't go right of center. Right of center throws you off, so when you manipulate your nib, it pushes you up and down exaggerated movements away from the paper. So that's the first thing. And what affects that is not the angle of writing. Does not. It now has to do with pin's diameter. And what I mean by that is here is a diagram. If I can get it separated, come on. All right, so here is how the nib angle is determined for a pin. So if you kept a solid angle, so say you made your pins at 55-degree angle, every single flange, it'd be great when your pin was thin. But as your pin increases in diameter, so does the distance that nib is from that center axis. So what you can see here, my pin is a pointer, this nib has slid out, okay? And when you get into a big caret, in order for that nib to align with center, it would be out of the nib. So if your pin is fat, your angle is going to be steeper. You can see that there. There's the angle of a fat pin. There's the angle of a middle pin, and then a thinner pin. So that is what determines the angle of your flange. There is no set angle. Now, what happens then is because you're having to, say you have a really thin pin with a properly aligned nib and a really fat pin with a properly aligned nib, you can see there's very, very major deviations. So when you're using those guidelines, as the line changes, turn your paper more. Turn your paper more, less. You don't always have to have this pointing at your belly. That is incorrect, because if your pin, you need to have it so that the nib lines up with these lines perfectly. And the reason is so when it spreads, both tines have sharp edges. So whatever it takes to move that paper to line it up with the way you hold your pen is the correct way. If someone says you have to have this pointing at your belly for it to write correctly, they're wrong. And it's simply because we have all of these variations in pens now. We don't have, you know, when you look at all those older holders I showed earlier, they're all very, very thin. They're all very similar. So there would be pretty much standard across the board, but now it's not anymore. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having a large pen or a small pen or in between. There's nothing. It's your personal preference. That's what determines it. The reason that the nib should align. Okay, I'm going to have to imagine this a little bit, and I'm going to do it. I don't have the best camera angle for this. Okay, so when you rotate, if it's in line, I'm trying to get this. If it's in line, the tip of your nib stays the same distance from the paper because you're rotating on that center axis when you're doing small manipulations with your fingers. When it's over here and you move, if this nib was way over here, your hand would be pushed up away from the paper. So your hand's going to be doing this all the time, up and down and up and down. And you're already flexing and you're always getting the, you're trying to get those swells and everything. And if you're fighting your hand moving up and down as well as all of these other little things that are going on, it's going to affect negatively on your penmanship. So that's why that is important for that to be in line with the center, because when you do a finger manipulation, you're moving on that center axis. Does that make sense? Yep. We're going to look at that flange angle next. So you now know that, and all of these are available on my website. You can download and print out if you need them. So there's a link section, so you can download all these. I provide them for free, as well as guidelines. I make my own guidelines, and always, if I change guidelines, I put them on there. Okay, so that's the first thing, is getting the nib aligned with the center axis of your pen holder. Then the next thing is the inward, what I call the inward cant. Okay, and this is, imagine looking at the end of your pen like that. So there's your flange when it comes. It's lined up like that. But the problem that you're going to have is most likely you're going to grab the pen, and when you write, it's going to be like on one tine. Okay, so you want both of those tines to be flat on the paper. In order to do that, you take this and you bend it up. And let me explain. So this is the way I tell people to adjust their pen. Close their eyes. Don't look at your pen. Comfortably hold it in your hand, and then lay your hand down like you were going to write in the position that you're going to write. And look at how the nib lines up with the paper. Now you'll notice here that mine is absolutely even. Left and right tine touch the paper exactly the same amount. If it was up on the right tine or up on the left tine, because of the way I grip, what I need to do is I need to bend this up and down just like this, so you can see it's not greatest because it's a red line. It's not showing up well. There was the original angle of the thing. So what happened is pushed up this edge of the pen in order to bring this, so both tines lay flat on the paper. Very, very important, because if they're not flat, the left or right edge of your your swell, your shade, will suffer. So yeah, and that's your first adjustment when you get a pen. Now, and that affects the actual quality of your letters. The next adjustment, again, this is on my website. I also have videos on YouTube for all this stuff, is called the upward cant, is what I call it. So when you get a pen, mine are different. When you get most pens, they're like this. They're absolutely straight. So let me pin this so it's straight. There it is. Absolutely parallel. Now, what happens is when you write, let me grab this camera. I'm gonna move the cameras. See if we can get it. There we go. See that a little bit, right? A little bit better. Have to bear with me. I'm getting used to this, all the streaming stuff. All right. So when you write, you want to have your pen up on the tip of the point as much as you possibly can without it catching the paper on your hairlines, your upstrokes. That's the whole point. So if you're up too high and you hear that scratching, well, you may not because I'm on a mic, but when you hear that scratching, that means you need to bring this nib angle down, flatter. And that's what this adjustment does. This adjustment, give me a second. Need an octopus to help me here. By moving this flange up, bending it the way this direction shows, I then bring my nib flatter to the paper and not as up on point. Okay? And you want to do that until you can glide and you don't hear the tines catching. And that changes over time. As you get better with a lighter touch, you'll be able to tip it back up more and more and more as you write. When I first started writing, I had this sucker cranked way up. So it was like that and nothing. So it was like that and nothing caught, and it helped me out tremendously. But then I got better, and so I was able to flatten it out more towards this. And you just do that as much as you need to make it work for yourself. But keep in mind, if you get too flat, you're no longer writing on the tip of the nib. You're writing on the side of the tine, so you don't want it too flat. You want it to be upward as much as possible to get those nice thin hairlines. If you're upcanting so much that your pen is touching the paper, you need to work at lightening up your touch. That's all there is to it. I mean, you shouldn't be down this low on the paper writing. Your letters are going to suffer as a result of that. So if you're that high up, yeah, you really need to work on lightening your touch on the paper. One of the things they taught in the old schools, like the Zenarian, was grip, which is not taught anymore. Excuse me, let me get a drink. Grip hasn't been taught since, God, like the 1930s or 40s in schools, at least in the US and probably most of the world. They just give you a pencil and you're supposed to write however you want. One of the most important things is having a very, very light grip. And what they would do was in class, as they were writing, the teachers would run up behind them and try and snag their pen out of their hands. And there's a couple stories of where if you're holding it tight, they'd whack you on the hand with a ruler or something. So you want to have a very, very, like this is me holding the pen, and it easily moves in and out. You don't need to white knuckle it and death grip it. So that's the first thing. And that in itself will help you lighten your touch writing. Just being able to hold the pen lightly, like it's what was it Brian Walker said, the butterfly touch. It was like a butterfly is just landing on the paper, and it's very, very light, little floating right above the paper. So it's very, very important. So, and that's pretty much all there is to adjusting the pen. Those three things. So you've got, your nib aligned with the center axis, then you've got this upward cant, and then you got the inward cant. And once you do that, it's really, really simple. Now, one of the things I do with my pens that not everyone does is when I cut the slot in here where this flange is, I don't cut it straight. I cut it at a slight angle. It's only like a couple degrees, but it's enough to get it more like this out of the box. And the reason for that is not because everyone uses it like that. It's because for new people especially, it's really, really helpful if they can just pull their pen out and try to write, because it's discouraging. And as everyone knows, it's really discouraging to have the problems you run into. And it just makes it easier. So yeah, that porcupine pen, I still have that. I'll give it away sometime soon. I'll do a giveaway and give away all my weird pens. I need to make a new weird pen. So that's pretty much, I've touched on a lot of stuff here. Dorothy, do you want to allow some Q&A, or what do you want to do here?
We have time for.
Yeah, I'm here to hang out and talk with you all. So as long as people want to hear my mouth running, I'll sit here.
Did the vintage holders have the same upward cants?
They did not. They were made because it was, again, that old school of thought that, let me get a good example. You can see this is very, very straight, very, very straight across. They were hard to bend. So the thing with them back then is they were taught, number one, to write using this size pen because everyone did. Um, and everyone was taught to write very, very up on the tip of the nib, and you were just supposed to adapt and do it this way. We've come beyond that. We have so many people of different levels. It's not the same as it used to be. You know, if you were going because this was going to be your job and you had to do it right, and the end of story. People now do it for a hobby and all kinds of things. And that's why I have no problem with all the different variations and sizes and all of this, because people do different things. So yeah, and now we're using brass and nickel silver and things like that, and they're much easier to bend. Like I said, these old ones are impossible to move. Those flanges are horrible.
Mm. Yep.
So,
Okay.
Let's see.
What about the straight holder ferrule design? Why do you use the Tachikawa ferrule?
That Tachikawa ferrule was someone had that. I can't remember what it was. Someone wanted a crow quill straight holder, and they had that Tachikawa and said, "Oh, that's really, really cool. Could you make wood like that?" And like, no, not really. To get those small, tiny cuts, that would be next to impossible. So I said, well, let me do this. So I bought one of those. I said, let me buy one of them, and I'll tear it up and see if I can use the part out of it, which worked. Absolutely did, and it'll hold, you know, a crow quill, and it'll hold a normal flange or normal nib. Sorry, not flange. The ones I use now that everyone is pretty much using, it's about the only thing manufactured is this type. God, you know, and there's the ones I have made for me are stainless steel, which is a huge improvement over the chrome ones that rusted, but that's all there is. There's been a couple different iterations of it, but I still think that works. So don't change the wheel if it works, you know.
Okay, question. The position of the curved part of the flange with respect to the body of the holder. Sometimes it is closer, sometimes farther, and which one is better?
Okay, you're getting, yeah, there are people that put them very, very far away. Let me find one of Bill's. I know I have one too. So what I was talking about is Bill Lilly. Bill Lilly, here it is. Oh, that's not a good example of it. It changes the angle of the flange as well. Now, is it right? Is it wrong? I don't care for it, and I'll explain why as soon as I find them. Give me 1 second. I got too many things here. Oh. Okay, there we go. This is a good example. So this is one of Bill Lilly's pins. I'll get the lighting a little bit better and show you. So what he does is he places this nib way out here away from the body, okay? And there's a space in between. And as a result, it has to be, if you can look, that nib is much more angled that direction. Put the words out the way. A little bit simpler to see now. Okay, so that nib is way more in like that. I don't like it out there like that. It works. You can absolutely write with it. But my thought is, and I'm not saying I'm right or wrong or indifferent, it's just my thought and the way I do it, is I get it closer to the body. Because when it's out here like this, you have a lot more metal that can flex, okay? And what we're doing when we write is we're flexing the nib. Well, I don't want the flange to move, because then I got two things chain flexing, and I got to compensate for both of those things. It all would only happen if you're pushing really hard on a downstroke or something, but I still prefer it to stay in place compared to that's farther out. It just allows for more flex in the flange. And the only thing flexing, in my opinion, should be the nib.
Okay, a big shout out to Mr. Sato. I think he's here.
Uh-oh.
There's a bit of bromance going on between Chris and Mr. Sato.
We give each other so much crap all the time. It's so funny.
There is a question about I read in the Business Educator to use flange specially adjusted for round hand, and it also mentioned that
Yeah.
do you have flange adjusted for Spencerian, or is it for like adjusted for the business?
The only thing that may be different is if you're writing OP or something, ornamental, you're going to be moving at a different speed and everything. The angle is still the same. You're still writing at that 52 to 55 degree. With OP, you're going to be much more on the tip and very, very light. I've got one of the companies that did that. I know what they're talking about. It's most likely Strom's ad. Strom had all these different flanges. Hold on, let me try and find a couple different ones. And it's kind of ridiculous, in my opinion. So there we go. There's the two that they're talking about. Okay. So we have this type of flange, Strom. Okay. Then they made another one that's like this. Trying to get a little bit farther away. So there's I don't know if you can see it quite. There it is. It's got like it folds down and then it folds back up instead of just being the hook. This double bent flange was what they considered their engrosser's flange. And to me, I don't see a difference. They're both sitting about the same distance away from the pin. They're both holding I don't know. I can't tell you. So maybe it was just something old timers did or said, or I don't see a reason for it and never have. So I've always just said it's the same. The only thing that's going to tweak is those little variations, which we can now do and not have a flange you can't move. That's my thought.
Gray Harris asked something off topic, but what are your thoughts about the feasibility of recreating vintage nibs?
Not possible. And I'll explain why quickly. Because I had this conversation with lots and lots of people. Brian Walker put a whole bunch of time into that Leonard Principle nib. And so did Nick Diaquano. But Brian, what they did was they actually spec'd every little detail, micrometers, all the thicknesses in different places and all that on several different of them. And they've recreated the principality as close as they can with the Leonard Principle. And the reason why is it's a machine process now. They punch out the nib, and then the machine does this, and the machine does that step, and that step, and that step, and that step. Well, back when the principality was made, it was a viable business, which had to be, now it's not a major market, to produce nibs. So you got to be able to do it affordably. But I think I have a link to it on my website, but there's this family history thing. It goes back about Gillette factory, and it was rows and rows and rows of women. They employed primarily seamstresses because they had delicate finger skills, was their thought. And so what would happen is that nib was made, and then it wasn't ground by a machine. After it was all made and handled and everything, one lady would make one grind on it, test it. If it didn't work, tossed it. If it was good, moved it to the next person. And the next lady would make another grind the opposite way and get everything tuned just exactly right. That nib was touched by people many, many, many times. So any errors, any flaws, anything was found. And you can't recreate that easily with computers or with modern technology. Could you do it? Yes. It would cost a fortune. And then we'd be right back at a very, very expensive nib, because you'd have to have laser measuring, or I don't know what would do it, but it would be possible, but it wouldn't be possible and have a product which was, it was expensive enough that you can throw it away and not feel bad, and that's it. It's that human touch, you can't hand grind, can't get that skill without spending a whole bunch of money on machinery for a very, very niche business that we're in.
Right. True. Yep.
Why are universal flanges? Okay, universal flanges is, they don't have, if you put them on the pin right, there's no limitation when it comes to adjusting the cant. They can be bent in any direction, same way as a normal one. But the universal flanges are popular because it makes it easy to change nibs. And I actually, well, now that I produce the deuce, that one doesn't have to be adjusted. You can actually slide the nib flange out, put the nib in, then put it back in, so it doesn't need adjustment. But a normal flange like this, you have to adjust it to the pin itself, which takes an entirely different bending set of skills. I did have a paper for that, but regardless, whatever. So the bullock is what you're referring to when you say the universal, and it allows you to, here's one, you put it in this pin so you can see what it is, so everyone knows exactly. This is a modern bullock. This is one of mine. It's like that, has a little screw, you loosen it, tightens your nib in there, tightens your crow quill in there, and then you don't have to change anything. You don't have to bend the brass. You just open it up, put the nib in, tighten the screw, and you're done. It's really helpful for beginners. It's also helpful because you can do really, really quick trick, which is just rotate your nib in and right with the nib real quick to try it out if you're still experimenting with nibs. So that's the popularity of it. The downside of it is all the extra stuff in the way. You got this screw sticking down, and it has to be that long. I can't make it shorter because you have all these broad variations of nibs now. They're not all very similar, so it has to be able to open a lot. Creates more mass at the end of this pin. Once you find your nibs you like, you're going to come down and you're going to write with 2 or 3 nibs. Most of the people do, after you've learned. And at that point, it would be my choice to set up a pin for each nib. And that's why I sell so many obliques and why so many obliques are made. People have an oblique for their 303, the oblique for their 604, their oblique, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they don't have to readjust all the time. So yeah, that's why they're popular. I know, Mr. Sato's in here, and he's completely against those. I'm not going to spend the time giving him a hard time. I really want to, but hey, no, I prefer a normal flange, but it's really helpful for beginners. That's in the story. Makes it simple for them. So
the question was, with the nuts and screws and so on, it will be harder to adjust the cant, right, for the universal.
It doesn't bend quite as easily, but with what I do when I make mine, let's see if you can see it here. There's a small gap. I can't get this thing to focus on this. I don't know why. New to this whole thing. Anyway, there's a small little gap in there. You can bend this. I mean, this will bend. Look, I just bent it way up. It's now bent way the heck up. I can take it and I can tweak it that way. It still works. It'll bend all those directions. Just takes a little bit more strength to do it, but it's still absolutely feasible to bend.
Yep.
If it's tight up against the pin, then it won't. That's why I make sure that there's, when I cut these to fit, I make sure there's a gap there, and this gap is wrong because this wasn't made for this pin, but there should be a gap at the back as well. So.
Great. I think that's about all the questions that I see in the chat. Oh, somebody else has one more? No.
If ink gets inside the flange, how to clean it? Don't let your ink get in the flange. No. You can take, You can open it up a little bit, you know, with the tools or something, but the easiest way is like I've taken a bread tie that they tie up the bags with, and I strip off the plastic and take that wire and push it through there. You don't want to dunk your pin into a glass of water. You know, you don't want to take this wood and set it in a glass of water and let it soak. It's not good. You can do that. Just you need something really, really thin to go in between there.
Yep, that's great. Okay.
There's a good one. Floss. There you go. I put a thread through it and floss it. That's a good idea. Never thought of that.
Cool. Great. Okay, I think that's about it. All the questions we've asked and answered. Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate it. It's been great. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you invited me. It's been good. So,
Thanks everyone for
and
sharing this
I
session.
believe you're saving this, Dorothy, and it'll be on YouTube channel, correct? So,
Yeah. Mhm.
okay, cool.
Thanks everyone. Go visit
All
the
right.
gallery, have a look at the art, share some love with the artists. Thank you so much. Thanks
Yep.
everyone. Bye.
Almost 1 o'clock for me. So,
Yes.
night all.
Good night.
All right.
Good night.
Bye-bye.